Hello, my name is Ian, and today we're talking about Jack Santino's Holidays in America Ritual, Festival, and Celebration. This is the first chapter in his book All Around the Year. If you've read it, you probably see references to in this book we will be discussing. The book is a little bit old now. It's from the mid '90s. It's still one of the best surveys with and surveys perhaps does it an injustice. One of the best considerations of looking at taking a step back and looking at the process of holiday, looking at the process of calendar custom that is available. It's also a very accessible text. It's easy to read. It is sometimes a product of its time, but I think ultimately it's very useful for setting forward the context of the calendar custom because he's very clear in arguing basically the two different positions that one needs to consider when you're talking about a calendar custom. And that on one hand, they have histories to them. The history doesn't need to be very long, and he talks about invented traditions, and he talks about the emergence of new ones. But like almost virtually all folkloric things, there is a precedent that is going forward. That is, as we execute every calendar custom, we have the expectations for it are set by the previous calendar custom and how and other various influences. So it is not a useless effort to try and figure out the origins of these things. And so over the course of this chapter, he does go back and he looks at things like, well, let's set up the calendar year. Let's look at the solar year. Let's look at all those issues of going from equinox through solstice to equinox to solstice, and how the absence or presence of light is something that factors into how we measure time, how we measure the symbolic aspects of time, and the symbolic aspects of lightness and darkness, and that we have that within that context, celebrations emerge. Cool. And he's good with that. And, so we have those solar year ones. We have ones that are associated with not simply the solar year, but the harvest year. We have ones that are associated with historic days in the calendar, historical events that have become marked, like the 4th of July, like November 11th, and so on, where there is a historical moment that is being commemorated, and it has nothing to do with the weather. It has nothing to do with the position of the sun in the sky, but it has something to do with the national story. And so that is one of the things. And those are all good things to point out. Nevertheless, he's also good at demonstrating that what those are basically opportunities. They become this cluster of symbols, this cluster of basically this particular specialized vocabulary that we employ at particular times of the year for the basic purpose of gathering together among people that we know, love, cherish, whatever word you want to use, and commune. Be together, express. I don't even know if you want to use the word solidarity because that has thing, but express fellow feeling, express persistence in time, express something that communicates a sense of groupness to the group. And it's just at this time of year, this is the language we use. At this time of year, this is the language we use. So while it is good and important and useful to know the history of these things, the history of these things explains the vocabulary that we use. But it is not necessarily in fact, it is typically an empty answer to why we continue to do these. We continue to do the calendar customs. We continue in the same way that we continue to do rites of passage, in the way we continue to do virtually everything, because it is important to us. It is important to us, not that we fulfill some kind of obligation to mark to reenact through ritual drama some part of a sacred calendar or a civic religious calendar or whatever. It is important to us that we gather together. The manner in which we gather together, what informs the various things in which we gather together, will be based on those narratives, or will be based on those observances. And what is more, we gather together because, can't emphasize this enough, it is fun. One of the reasons that we participate in these things is because they are joyful, because they are because they are opportunities for food, drink, expressions of emotions, dance, all those kind of things. They are marked as special, and why we need to seek out some kind of justification for why it is fun to have fun is one of the strange elements that we kind of need to get past. Sometimes you might dismiss like a calendar custom, something like St. Patrick's Day, for example. You might say, "Oh, it's just an excuse to gather together to get drunk and party." It's like, well, yeah, but how is that bad? Because you could make the same argument that it's an excuse for kids to be cutting out shamrocks in kindergarten. It's like, well, it gives them something to cut out. It's a fun thing to do, and it's always a good thing. Moira Marsh talks about this when she talks about the dynamics of the prank, the practical joke. She's the scholar on the practical joke, and one of the things about practical jokes, I'm getting back to custom, don't worry. One of the things about practical jokes is that people need to somehow, or often are trying to come up with some sort of functional justification for them. Why would you do that? Why would you participate in that? And she reminds us time and again that fun is a rationale in and of itself. And if we forget that, we have just lopped off one of our limbs in terms of being able to wrestle this topic to the ground. Oh, see, I completed that metaphor. That was good. We've just absented ourselves from a vocabulary and from an understanding. It's like, well, we can't factor in joy, so we're going to have to come up with something else. It's like, okay. So anyway, and that's what he talks about. That's what Santino talks about in terms of sort of the blurred functions of them. In that, yes, they are enactments of moments in time, and they remind us of the cyclical nature of time and all the important things that we think of when we think about calendar customs. But just as importantly, they are reasons to get together with the people that we care about. And if we forget those two, if we only factor in the historical stories, we are kind of lost. So so it is about, the year is, you can talk about weekly calendar customs. You can talk about ritualistic moments that happen over the course of the week. So you can think about how, again, set through some kind of sacred narrative, you can think how the week is patterned in terms of times of leisure and times of work and times of sacrality and times of profanity. So we have not simply days of religious observance in the people of the book calendars of Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, where it's either the Friday night or the Saturday or the Sunday. And so, what introduces the 7-day pattern to begin with. But because that pattern exists, we have things like Friday nights as a more fun night than a Monday night. We have a sort of Saturday night, Sunday morning juxtaposition. We have family dinners. We have deals at restaurants. We have, albums are released on Fridays. New movies are released on Fridays. And our whole life is sort of patterned. And very much the marketplace, the commercial aspect is patterned around these times. But he's mainly focusing on the calendar year, because something that happens only once a year is slightly more special than something that happens only once a week, almost by definition. But again, there's a marker of time. This idea that we are operating within some kind of cycle, whether it is I mean, it is occasioned by the fact that the Earth rotates around the sun. Um, and it reminds us that there are things beyond our control that seem to repeat over and over and over again. So, despite the fact that we live in linear time, nevertheless, we also see the cyclical aspect of it. And the group exists in linear time, and the individual members age and depart, but are also born and enter. And so there is an ongoing period of change within the group itself. But at the same time, they participate in these moments, and they participate in these moments in a particular way that is important to that group, let alone to the larger group, to the larger society. It might be informed by patterns that are established well before the group existed. And it might be informed by marketplace and whatever the multiple complex of symbols that are used in any one occasion. They're sort of a thick middle, and then a whole bunch of creativity takes place. But one of the things that we do is we do it similar to the way it was done the year before, in order to express that sense of continuity, that despite what changes, we also have one and the same. But we operate in multiple calendars at any given time. So he talks about this example of Holy Week in 1984, where it was tax season. It was he was teaching at Georgetown, and Georgetown was winning the NCAA tournament, which is a basketball thing. It was it was the Christian Holy Week, so it was that time between Palm Sunday and no, sorry, I'm just trying to remember. It was just leading up to Palm Sunday. Passover was happening as well, and taxes were due, and so various, Santino's locating himself in the flux of a number of different groups. If we go back to our basic, our Dundesian definitions of the folk group as two or more people who share at least one thing in common, he's identifying himself as within the academic context of the university, but not simply the academic context in terms of the teaching, but also the membership at Georgetown itself. So he has his occupation as professor, but he also has his affiliation as Georgetown, as professor at Georgetown, and the sort of that aspect of it. He has his Catholicism. He has his friendship groups that have Judaism in them in terms of being invited to Seder's that week. He has his American civic obligations in terms of taxes. So a whole bunch of different events are, he's participating in a whole bunch of different cycles and hold a bunch of different calendars simultaneously. And so that's a kind of an interesting illustration. And, it's something that you can think of when you're thinking of your own existence, in that, if you are a student, then you are subject to your year is going to be conditioned by the semester system, and why September is big, why you have those 3 weeks off in December and then January again, and those kind of patterns. Those are the two 12 or 14 week clumps, where your summers are not necessarily off, because that might be the time when you actually have to earn money in order to pay for the rest of it, but they are defined largely by not attending classes. But within that, you're not simply about the being a student in a classroom. You're a student in a campus, and so there is the opening week festivities, there's participation in athletics, there's end of semester parties, there's winter carnivals, and so on, and all those sort of patterns that reinforce your identity with other students, not necessarily, although within the auspices of how you're identifying yourself as a student with the administration. And so the multiple aspects. Plus, you exist in North America, so you have the pattern of holidays that are there. Maybe you exist in Canada, where there are additional holidays that don't happen in the States, or vice versa. And so your time is patterned somewhat along those lines as well. You might have a religious tradition, and so your time might be factored along that And so it's like, it's Ramadan, but it's also XYZ. So how do I figure this out? And because you can be a full participant in a whole bunch of different calendars. And then there's conflict. He goes back to the Georgetown aspect, and when they won, there was I'm going to say riotous, but not necessarily in terms of anything destructive, but a huge bacchanalian, carnivalesque rejoicing in the streets of Georgetown. And, just a big party because it's a big deal when teams succeed. And despite the fact that it's in the middle of Lent, which is a time of austerity, the university is a Catholic university and run by Jesuits. Lo and behold, they were like, yeah, this is a time. This is your Georgetown identity is like more important right now than your observant Catholic identity, and this is at a very observant Catholic university. But it's like that's how it works, and they're not contradictory. They are creative tensions that are present, and I think that's kind of interesting. But because time is measured, we often see other people beginning to have a different measurement of time, and we get a little antsy. For example, the constant lament of how Christmas decorations enter into the stores earlier and earlier, or Halloween candies in the grocery stores earlier and earlier, and why people are engaged in one thing when they're not when the other thing isn't over. One of the interesting things one of the fascinating things that I've often found in Canada is because because Remembrance Day is basically the sole military observance, as opposed to the United States, where November 11th is Veterans Day and they have Memorial Day as well. That implicit rule that you don't decorate your house until after November 11th. So you might decorate your house for Halloween, and then the idea is that is somehow that is the border. You need to mark that line, and there's nothing that is preventing you from actually decorating your house, but it becomes a folk social convention that you don't decorate your house until November 11th. Why you're doing it as early as November, that's a different question. Why you're like chomping at the bit, I need to decorate, that's a different thing. But that starts to be my aesthetics as opposed to an actual question. But it is important for people to decorate their houses, or people find it is important to decorate their houses, and they want to do it as much as they can as it is seasonally appropriate, and there is a specific line of seasonal appropriateness. But we sort of see other people's calendars, like, why are you doing this? Now, sometimes it's practical. You look in the craft section of magazines, and the Christmas issues are coming out in February and March, because that's basically the lead up time it is to create. Trade shows and so on for Christmas are happening in February and March because there is a gearing up in time. So it's interesting to have this delayed shift. And then this delayed shift is another interesting aspect when you have communities that are temporarily bound outside of the holiday aspect. So he discusses things like he discusses Boy Scout troop camps, where over the summer they will have a Christmas, they will have a New Year's, they will have a Passover in these times, because and even though it is completely on one level temporally inappropriate, it is a fun way of participating in that group consciousness and that sense of group continuity in a manner that they can't do because they do not congregate at that time. And then you can also take that back to the very practical level. If you have people you want to be celebrating a Thanksgiving or a Christmas or whatever, I keep on reverting back to those, but you, for some reason, you can't gather as a family. For example, one of my students a few years ago, her father was a policeman, and when he was lower in rank and didn't have choice of shifts, he would often be working over Christmas. His shifts would be on Christmas Day. So they just time shifted, and we can time shift. We can time shift all the time, and it's appropriate. We still will perhaps try and keep it as appropriate as we can, but there's nothing keeping us that way, because it is important that we celebrate it together, not necessarily that we celebrate it according to some external measurement of appropriateness. Now, with an increasingly globalized population, you have the ability to participate in calendar customs that are perhaps localized, but if you have moved away from that place, you can still participate on the familial level, where through things like FaceTime, you can be sitting with your family at their meal, or transnational. So the way that the Moon Festival, for example, has the celebrations, the official television celebrations, which are part of the Chinese way of doing Moon Festival for a number of years, is broadcast internationally, so people can gather together and participate as a extended nation around the world, basically. So technology allows us to continue these things, and that is so the relationship between technological advance and how we can thereby continue to celebrate despite the fact that circumstances have changed is part of the creativity. And again, you can be very dour and suggest that things are can only be done in one particular way, or you can recognize that creativity is a place, has its thing, and that ties into the idea of he's using Hobsbawm's idea of invented traditions, which is always, I think, even though Hobsbawm isn't always suggesting this, I think there's a sort of a cynicism about the term invented. Hobsbawm was talking about how things are given authority by the state by draping these ideas of traditions upon them. So, like the creation of the clan system existed in Scotland. That historically based, but sort of the tartan system, the sort of the idea that they were kind of these ancestral families was really a superimposition of basically English ways of thinking of sort of family houses and so on onto Scottishness in a way after after the annexation of Scotland. And as royal families, English royal families, tied themselves into this Scottish sense to claim, basically to claim a inherited lineage from Scotland, which they did partly because of James and James the First and Charles and all the Scottish kings and so on, who became kings of England, but to reinforce that through ceremonial aspects. And so there's a cynicism about invented traditions in that they are always about, that they are, certainly when they are sort of a top down, that they are a way of justifying patterns in society through through expressive forms and through a, if not necessarily a false, then certainly a mythologized and oversimplified and historical basis for them. But on the other hand, so if we want to use the word invented or not, we're fine. But new traditions emerge, and usually they emerge because some kind of circumstance warrants it. Some group determines that this is a good thing to do, that we want to market in this way. Sometimes that group is the state. Sometimes that group is sort of a subculture. And how do they do it? Well, it's part a meeting of their whatever kind of narrative is behind that rationale. So they will perhaps take some symbols that are embedded in that particular narrative, and they will bring it forward, and they will start they will start observances using those kind of symbols. And he gives the example of the tying the yellow ribbon during the Iraq hostage crisis in '79 and '80. And that tying a ribbon is a memory for the people who are being held hostage, and that is based on the Tony Orlando and Dawn Tie a Yellow Ribbon song, and the choice of yellow was, about basically someone who's still in Vietnam. I know, so really still in prison, and my love he holds a key. Is it a prison one or is it a Vietnam song? But anyway, so someone who is has been missing and is being remembered, and the yellow ribbon is becomes the symbol, and then it got taken from this song, and yellow was chosen because it scanned better, and became this serious symbol, and a symbol that reemerged during the first Gulf War in the 90s, like 1990. So all of a sudden, this arbitrary thing, taken from popular culture, was meaningful, and you can be cynical, and go or you can turn it very positively, because they. Just because something is new doesn't mean it doesn't have, and just because something might come from some kind of strange recent narrative doesn't mean that it isn't immediately symbolically resonant. Now, once you have sort of perhaps a central symbol, you might have other events that you're basically borrowing from how you understand a custom or a calendar custom to go. So the idea of like, well, there should be a meal, and maybe the meal is going to be informed somewhat. The choices of the choices of food. Maybe there is a symbolic part of that meal. There should be, perhaps there's some kind of activity, some kind of ritualistic movement that's associated with it. Sometimes maybe there's some form of dress which is or isn't related to the originating story. In 2021, in Canada, we had the first official federally mandated federal holiday day of observance for recognizing victims of residential schools, and day for truth and reconciliation. And so that was on September 30th, and it was the first time. I mean, we had been observing it on a very vernacular level, really, through the process of Orange Shirt Day, and the orange shirt had to do with the young girl who arrived at a residential school, and her prized possession was this orange shirt, and it was taken from her. And I'm blanking on her name, but I'll put it on the screen. But the idea that this is in our recent history because she's alive today, and she's only about 6 years older than I am. So this is not buried in some kind of romanticized past. But the shirt, the orange shirt, became an important symbol. The strange symbol of wearing shirts that we also have with like Pink Shirt Day for anti-bullying, and it became something that was celebrated in schools, or celebrate might be a word that you're uncomfortable with, but so we'll be dodging around that, because when we think about sort of mournfulness, we don't necessarily want to use the word celebrate. So we had this Orange Shirt Day that was on September 30th, and then this will actually be a day where the stores are closed, the banks are closed, government offices are closed, the post office is closed, and we will gather and we will contemplate this. It's like, okay, good. And the first year, it's like, some places were still open, some were not, because there's an inertia to things. It's like, we didn't plan business, we haven't spoken to our unions, we don't know what's going on. So there's this practical infelicities that happened with it. Then it's Orange Shirt Day, and it's like, well, what do you do beyond wearing an orange shirt, and what form does it take? And so, I guess it's a day perhaps spending time with the kids. The idea that maybe there would be some form of reference texts that you could talk to children about, or read histories, but that's both very important, but sort of very vague thing about what to do on this day. Where I am, there was a walk up on that we could that everyone was invited to participate in, and it was basically walking in a field next to one of the schools in community, and basically walking in a circle a couple of times and then listening to speeches, and that was a good thing. But it's kind of one of those good things that's like, this is a good thing that we did. is this the thing that we are going to do? What form will this take? But everyone thought it was appropriate, and it was appropriate. That wasn't the issue. It's just that it's interesting to see how a day of commemoration, a day of that is now having some kind of fixity to it, and that is now being celebrated in the home. For the Orange Shirts Day, there were sort of curriculum suggestions, and there were school assembly ideas on how to market. But now with the schools closed, and what do we do? And these are good, positive questions, because what do we do? How do we? This is something that we want to observe. How do we go about doing it? And then we sort of have that. Well, okay, when we're done observing, can we go out for supper? What is it? Because it's also a holiday. It's also a time off of work, and it's good that it's a time off of work. But then it's like, is this a play day? I mean, after a while, what do we do? I see that a lot on Remembrance Day, where we can be observing it quite solemnly up until like 11 o'clock or noon, if ceremonies last for an hour or something, and then it's like, free day, and that's when we start decorating. In the afternoon, that's when we start decorating our houses. Or it's like, you can't get a table at Swiss Chalet on Remembrance Day, and it's like, because it's sort of we don't have a full assortment of things. It's not a family day the way Christmas is a family day. So we can look at these emerging, invented traditions. We can look at them cynically. And there's no problem with beginning with cynicism if you really insist. But I think it's always more useful to think of them holistically and optimistically, in that they are emergent. They are forms of bricolage, taking these symbols and bringing them in together in creative new ways. And then he does have an interesting question about the sort of the what he calls the syntax, and that it's neat to look at a holiday, a day of observance, a day of celebration, and where it fits in relation to the other ones. And he it's this neat observation about between Christmas, which you can argue is basically a winter solstice holiday, and Easter, which is a vernal equinox holiday, spring equinox, and that all the ones in between, Groundhog Day, Valentine's Day, St. Patrick's Day, they are all sort of ever so much more increasingly optimistic in a way, that they're all kind of about we've been in the darkness of midwinter, and we're just bursting towards the sun, and so that we move forward in this way. It's just kind of neat, and it is good to think about the symbols that we associate, whether it is the symbol of the orange shirt, whether it's the symbol of Cupid and Valentine's, whether it's a symbol of the turkey for Thanksgiving, whether it's a symbol of the Maple Leaf for Canada Day, whether it's the symbol of the 2-4 for Victoria Day. The way that symbols are open to interpretation, and yet at the same time they become very fixed. So all of a sudden we enter into sort of the fuzzy word of semiotics, but the idea of holidays and rituals and calendar customs as basically being a cluster of symbols, some of which seem more or less fixed. Like, I don't think St. Patrick's Day is going to not have green associated with it anytime soon. I don't think Valentine's Day is going to not have red associated with it anytime soon. I don't think Halloween is not going to have orange associated with it anytime soon. But there are also opportunities for dynamism. There are also opportunities to bring other things in. So, in a way, again, it's this vocabulary of symbols that we use. And that, what day is it? It's this. Okay, well, these are the things we have to do. We gotta have yams, and then these are the things that we can do because, we personalize them. We gotta have Aunt Betty's yams, And then these are the things that are still nevertheless open to us. So remembering the calendar custom, all folklore, are intentional. That there's absolutely nothing that says that you have to do this, that says that you have to do it in this way, beyond the inertia of tradition. None of this is necessary, but they are chosen. They are selected as being important. They're selected as being important because, on one hand, reaffirming a participation in a sacred or historical narrative or connection with the earth is seen as a positive good. And it's difficult to dissuade one from that. You can have problems with the narrative as it is being suggested, and we see that right now, or we see that in the past 10 years in the United States, where the let's stop Columbus Day, and let's turn it into Indigenous Peoples Day. It is, maybe we can. There are problems with the way that this civic religious narrative and this historical narrative is being commemorated, because there are problems with the history that is being commemorated. Thanksgiving is like, I can understand Thanksgiving, but maybe we should really reevaluate how we present the pilgrim narrative. And that's a thing, and that's an interesting thing, because it's like the what is being expressed is not inherently a bad thing, the idea of giving thanks, but how we continue to communicate it and what is the underlying story, maybe that needs to be flexed. And you can be conservative, lowercase c conservative, and you can say no, that's the story, or you can be or you could not be, and introduce a dynamism that retains the good things and starts to eliminate, or at least starts to problematize and give rationale for why these are problematic, the negative things. And so they can be progressive in that way. Speaking of things like the shift from Columbus Day to Indigenous Peoples Day and the problems with the American Thanksgiving narrative and so on, you might notice there's a section in here about First Nations holidays. And it's one of those things I'm going to give as much liberty and as much benefit of the doubt as I can, in that it was 25 years ago, and I'm guessing that someone said, maybe if you're going to talk about this, you should talk about First Nations people. And he's like, okay. And then he did a fairly decent page and a half. The fact that he doesn't keep it up in the rest of the book, spoilers for you, and that First Nations holidays and observances are conspicuously absent in the rest of the book, doesn't suggest much in the way of some kind of integration. The way that even to this day, and certainly in the mid-1990s, the term Indian was still being used a lot. And when I go down to American Folklore Society, and I have people who are scholars of American First Nations communities, and they're still okay with using the word Indian. It's like, all right, cool. So we are. It's a little bit awkward, and it's almost like this is a nice first effort, but so anyway, that's sort of almost a spoiler alert. Particularly as there's no real effort to frame that within the context of contemporary, emergent First Nations stuff. It's basically, look, they have a lot of ancient things about the passing of the year. It's like, yeah, but they live in the 20th century, and so that is a contemporary enactment of these things. But they are modern people, and they are bringing modern ideas to it as much as they are performing within that context of, and this is something that is ancient. Again, point I cannot stress enough. The folk are always contemporary to their times. Everyone in 2021 is 2021 savvy. If you're in a different part of the world, maybe there are certain things that you do not have access to, but you are always contemporary to your time. Picking things, being conservative, narrowing the range of symbols that you use is a deliberate, intentional act. It is not a necessary thing. It is not inherent, and it does not mean that if you do not do that, you are somehow doing something impure, but it is the aesthetic that the group themselves brings to the fore. But that is a contemporary group saying, guess what? We're not going to do anything contemporary right now. I'm like, cool. But when this is over, we're going back to our contemporary things, right? Hells yeah. Just a little diatribe that I tend to go on. So anyway, this is, I do kind of recommend the book, in part because it is it hasn't been, no one has written an update to it. No one has shifted the study of it, and I don't have the effort to do that. But so All Around the Year is a good primer in how to consider these customs, and because he does a deep dive in terms of the solar year. Like one chapter is I think from midwinter to midsummer, and one is midsummer to midwinter, and then he talks about new and emergent traditions, and it's good. But this is just the first chapter of it, and I recommend. So anyway, I don't think I have anything else to say. As ever, my friends, my name is Ian. Today I've been talking you through Jack Santino's what's the name of the chapter again? Holidays in America, Ritual, Festival, and Celebration, from his All Around the Year. I wish you nothing but the best. Be well, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.